KB, it's just incredible to have you. And I think because I've known you for so long and I feel like we've grown up together a lot. I came to the Seattle Storm when I was 19 and you were my CEO there. And we did a lot of contracts together, won a couple of championships, got into a couple of verbals, all the stuff that, young people do when they're growing up. Uh, I've seen you just do some incredible things, in the sport and with the Seattle Storm. And in terms of what their organization looks like today, they wouldn't be there today without you and what you did for the Storm, which, so that's a credit to you and how great you are. So thank you for agreeing to join us today. And I guess I'm just going to talk to you basically about stuff about being a young CEO. Like, how did you get into the Storm? How did that all eventuate with your work with the Sonics and yeah, so just start there.
Yeah, so I think it's really relevant to say that I grew up in Seattle and played basketball here, started as a really young age, played college basketball at 3 different colleges actually. My route to Division I wasn't direct. I played at a junior college because I had a really bad injury my senior year in high school. Was one of the top players in the state, but had a pretty serious injury. And so a lot of the scholarships sort of went by the wayside. Went to junior college, then went to Seattle U, then finished at University of Washington. Ended up getting a degree. I thought I always wanted to work in sports, but back then when I was growing up, I didn't really know what those jobs were. I didn't want to coach. I actually wanted to get involved in business in some aspect. And so I got my degree in journalism because being a sports reporter was really the only job that I could see as a woman would put me in and around sports. Well, I started coaching high school basketball after I graduated from college. I went to work and just kind of did a business job working in project management. But I was really involved in the women's basketball community from the time I played in college, and then coached some of the top AAU teams. I had a high school program. Well, when the American Basketball League decided to come to Seattle in 1996, they got my name somehow, just as somebody that was from here, played here, and had been involved and pretty active in the women's basketball community. I had a little bit of business experience, I think like 4 or 5 years, but didn't know anything about a pro sports franchise or women's pro basketball, but got a great opportunity. I left my well-paying job to go do this dream thing. I think it took me about 30 seconds to say yes, and made no money, but it was a sort of passion project, and had somebody that really took me under their wing. And after a year and a half, he went to go work for the league office in San Francisco, and they gave me an opportunity to be a GM at 29.
Wow.
And so I was running the Seattle Reign of the ABL. It was a really successful franchise. Unfortunately, the ABL ended up folding. 2.5 years later, the WNBA launched the summer after the ABL. And after the W launched, the Seattle Sonics decided they wanted to get involved in women's basketball. The Supersonics had come off the NBA Finals, and they actually kind of paid attention to what the Seattle Reign was doing. And we were pretty successful as a startup grassroots league. And they called me and said, "We'd love for you to come and join the Sonics organization and help us get an expansion team." The WNBA had announced they were going to add 4 teams. And at that time, there was a competition for teams. And so the Sonics said, let's get a franchise here in Seattle. So I got hired in 1999 and spent 12 months working to get a franchise. And we obviously announced the team halfway through 99, and then started the next summer, and you came a year later. So it was a little bit of being in the right place at the right time, having a good reputation, right? I built a name for myself in the basketball community. And then I think for me, taking a chance on something that I loved. I knew I was going to make a lot less money. I didn't have any idea where it was going to lead me to, but took a chance. And then I think a real key part of my story is right from the beginning, I had somebody who really invested in me and believed in me, maybe even before I believed in myself, and certainly before I had, a ton of experience. But they saw something in me and managed to convince me that I could do it. And kind of the rest is history. I stayed in women's pro basketball for 18 years.
Yeah, right. Was that, and so who was that? Was that, sorry.
His name was Jim Wireman. He worked for he was the general manager and president, I think was his title at the time, of Seattle Reign, helped launch the team. He was a longtime Seattle business executive, and got offered the job, hired me. I think I was his first hire. And when he left to go work at the league office, said, I think she's ready.
Yeah,
and
right.
it was kind of a funny joke. The commissioner of the league, Gary Cavalli, who ended up coming to my Storm retirement party, we stayed friends and are still friends. He was writing the press release and he said, when's your birthday? And my birthday was like 2 months away. And he said, God, I really want to put in the press release that you're 30. He goes, it seems weird to just say you're only 29. And I was like, yeah, I'm only 29. Sorry. But it was a huge opportunity. I got to be a part of the ABL when there were, we had like 8 employees. I don't even know if we had that many. So I also started and learned the business very quickly by doing everything.
Right.
Each of us had a ton of responsibilities. And I'll tell you that 2.5 years in the ABL is really what allowed me to develop a lot of the muscles that I think became the foundation of my 15 years with the Storm. Understanding the business, being scrappy, because we were a really small startup organization, and also very quickly having to learn how to lead.
Yeah, well, I think that's one of the things, with sport, grassroots, community sport, women's sport in general, you're very much under-resourced. So the general manager, the commissioner, president, whatever you want to be, you're literally doing like everybody's job. So it gives you those skills and the ability to try and manage and, also be one of the workers as well. So that leadership piece, though, it's a big one. Like, how do you feel, like, in terms of your leadership and your development of your leadership skills and style, how did that evolve?
By watching, like, I think modeling and representation is so important. So I look back on my career and I think about my maturation and evolution as a leader. I think having people who invested in me and knowing what that felt like when leaders saw me and really kind of met me where I was. And I've tried to model that over the years because I know the value that had and impact that had on me. And then just I've always tried to pride myself on just always wanting to learn and observe and through watching other people do the kinds of things I want to do, particularly people who are successful. So I always paid a lot of attention to leaders in the different organizations that I worked in, or leaders that I came across that I felt could contribute to my development as a leader. And then I think I had to learn to get comfortable with this and got better at it in the later part of my years. But I think feedback is a really, really important part of how we accelerate our development and our growth. And initially for me as a young leader, a lot of times that feedback was hard. Yeah. But what I very quickly started to realize is that was a example of investment too. People who take the time to give you feedback and kind of help you grow and learn from either mistakes or opportunities where you could have performed better. I think when we as leaders really start to see critical feedback as a sign of investment in our development, that can be a huge opening and a huge kind of awareness, and your ability to be vulnerable and humble around that, I think, is a sign of maturation for every leader.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess on that, like, is that something that you had naturally, or is that something that sort of happened, like that vulnerability? And I've been sitting this week, we've done women's, some panels on women in sport and like leaders, and, we're sort of talking about how like at the moment, there's all these different programs to help women, become great leaders, give them the skills they need to be successful at high in women's sport. It's like, we're not the ones that need, it's a culture. It's actually the system. It's not women needing more skills. We've got the skills. So I guess, in the sense of like for you and how you got to where you got to, was there a lot of that sort of investment from like external sources like government, federal government? I don't know how the political system works over there, but like, the leadership training programs and, like who helped you? Was it more the people that you were working with, or was it externally?
I never had any. I mean, I think that's one of the interesting things of my career is I got put in leadership positions really early, really young, big job, like public job. I mean, running the Seattle Reign, the first women's pro basketball team, at a really young age with really no experience doing it. I think one of the silver linings of that is I knew I didn't know what I was doing. So I immediately had humility around it because nobody had ever done it before, much less me, 29 years old. And I think for me, I had so much respect for the job and the opportunity. I knew that 12 or 13 women's pro leagues before the ABL failed. I knew what this meant for our game, for my city, for the organization that I represented, for the athletes that we drafted that first year to play pro ball in the United States. So I think the combination of my own humility and awareness about my inexperience and the magnitude of the opportunity and not wanting to fail forced me into a position that probably wasn't natural, which was asking for help. That's not really wasn't a strength of mine necessarily at 29. Somebody that had always been super independent, had had a lot of success on the basketball court, in the classroom, things that I had done. But that opportunity really forced me organically to say, wow, I don't know what I'm doing. So I think there was just a natural humility and a willingness to accept help because I really wanted us to be hugely successful. And I knew that I was in over my head in some ways.
Yeah, early on. So when you started with the Storm, so when the Storm is new, a lot of excitement in Seattle around it. What were some of the biggest challenges for you then in that period of time? Because you were with the Sonics as well. So what were some of the biggest?
Yeah, great question, Laz. I think so. One of them I'll say, at the time, the assumption that Commissioner Stern had around WNBA teams was that there's these NBA organizations who have empty buildings in the summer. They have staffs that have an off season, and we can just leverage those resources and those available dates to build this new property that's going to play sort of in between the NBA season. I think a lot of his assumptions were obviously right, super smart, strategic guy. But I think one of the operational ways in which that didn't really pan out is, a lot of the Sonic staff resented the fact that they had to work in the summer. And a lot of them weren't fans of women's basketball and wanted their off season and didn't feel like the NBA was only a 7-month job. It was 12 months a year, and now you're not paying us any more money and we're having to work in the summer. We have to go to 20 more events. And so one of the biggest challenges for me was internal and actually just really figuring out how to get buy-in across the organization with all the frontline staff who were doing all the work. The ownership was great. The president who hired me and who I reported to, John Drazel, great, very supportive. But, those frontline employees in the marketing department, in the ticket sales department, weren't so thrilled.
Yeah, right.
And they joined an organization because they're passionate about the NBA. They didn't go to work for the Sonics because they were passionate about women's basketball. So thankfully, as you well know, 2004 really catapulted us and really changed the landscape. And obviously it's well known how it changed the trajectory of the Storm in our community. But I will also tell you, it really changed how the Storm resonated with the staff.
Yeah, right. So
they all got rings, right? The first ring those employees got was thanks to you, not Gary Payton.
And Betty.
Right? I mean,
we had a good team.
Championships matter.
They do.
They matter.
So how, then the challenge is those 3 or 4 years before that, how did you manage to get buy-in? How was that? What sort of things did you do to try and get them on board and create a gap? Oh, sorry, bridge that gap.
I think I have language for this now. I don't know that I was doing it consciously back then, but I do know that I tried to be really mindful of knowing my audience, right? So understanding who the influencers were in the organization, what drove them, what mattered to them, and how did I first build a relationship, build trust, do what I can to support them. You and I were talking about stakeholder engagement a little bit ago. And I don't know how I learned that. Maybe you could sort of equate it to like my time as a team captain on a basketball team and how you have to, right? There's so much synergy between our experiences, competitive athletes with business and leadership. But that was one of the first things was I just tried to really relationship build with the 6 or 7 people in the organization that really made the decisions and had ultimately influenced their respective teams. And a character that all too well. I mean, a huge part of that was Lynn, Coach Dunn.
Yeah.
I mean, her personality, as you know, just cuts through everything. And, even though our team wasn't successful those first few years, she's one of the most endearing, charismatic personalities in our game. And you can't help but be attracted to her as a person, as a personality. And so I think the two of us were kind of a formidable duo. And, and I'd be remiss if I didn't acknowledge just the partnership that we had.
Yeah, you're right.
And could talk to each other about what our challenges were in a way that, a lot of times, you and I talked about this, I think, at breakfast. We're all so loyal and protective of this thing called women's sports. And, it has its warts and its challenges, and as those things were showing up for Lynn and I, we didn't talk to a lot of people about that. We would just lock in with each other and share experiences and she was a huge mentor of mine. And we tried to just help each other because there aren't a lot of people that you feel like you can really talk to about what's really going on, because you want to protect the brand and protect the narrative. And those early days, I don't know if I would have made it without Coach Dunn and just her perspective, her experience, and just her ability to use humor to just sort of allow you to just keep moving.
She's like the only person I know that can jug a jug of beer with no hands. Like,
you remember when she did that with the pitcher?
She had a pitcher of beer and she jumped
put it in her
no
teeth.
Hands.
Put it in her teeth with no hands and never put it down. I'll never forget that night. I know. I think I lost the bet. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I lost that bet.
She's funny. Like, great coach, great human. So I guess on that, who are some of the women that really inspired you along the way? I mean, obviously you've had a lot of different experiences, but I think in terms of like your roles and the jobs that you've had, I mean, even in basketball, like who are some of the people that have really sort of inspired you, female women?
Oh my gosh, so many. I mean, I'll try to say this without getting emotional because, as you know, we just lost her a couple months ago. But first, my mom. I mean, my mom was a role model for what it means to be a really strong woman from my earliest memories. And you think about kind of a coach or a captain. My mom was that not only for my nuclear family, my dad and my siblings and I, but she's the oldest girl of 17 kids, 2 immigrants. And just she very early at a young age learned how to, sort of bring people together and lead. And so my mom's had a, just enormous impact on my life. And then pretty early on in my career, typically you'd say coaches, all my coaches were guys. I've never been coached by a female.
Really?
Yeah. I take that back till I got to UW, but all through high school, all through AAU until my last 2 years of college, all my coaches were men. But then there was the woman that I first worked with right after I graduated from college, is one of those women that saw something in me and took me under her wing and remarkably found the balance of always keeping me in a position to be successful, but challenging me in ways, but not so much that I would, do something drastically wrong and just was constantly giving me feedback. And she had an enormous impact on my career. And I think really prepared me in ways that she probably didn't even know she was for when I got that first job in the ABL. And then, many along the way, but I'm gonna also say, you and Sue, being a young executive in women's basketball, again, really appreciating the opportunity that we all had to do something special, not just for women's sports, women's basketball, but in my hometown. And then knowing just what phenomenal talents you both were, and for the Storm to have an opportunity to bring the two of you to Seattle, I felt a tremendous responsibility. And just watching you guys commit to what you did every day, the way you played, the way you conducted yourselves publicly, the way you conducted yourselves as teammates, it inspired me to try to match what you guys were doing on the court every day in the work that I did every day. And I mean that. I know you don't take compliments easily, but there's no way that I look at my career, and you and Sue have been a tremendous inspiration to me, and still are.
Sweet. I feel like for me, leaving sport and not being an athlete. Well, I am an athlete, but once I retired and everything, I sort of looked back and I looked at the women who had been executives in my career, and you're obviously the first one of those, and that I knew of, that I really sort of took notice of. And I think for me, trying to model some of my behaviors on the way that you led, and like watching what you did throughout my time with the Storm and how you brought your team together to make sure that every game, every event, everything was running so perfectly. And then also just, bringing a whole community together, which I don't know how you did it, but it's pretty remarkable to think that, the Storm and the legacy that they have now in Seattle is, because of your brains. It's pretty cool.
Well, thank you for saying that, Lauren. Honestly, I think a huge motivator for me was, and I've said this to many people, to have a dream job that I never even could have dreamed of. I shouldn't even say dream job, because I didn't even know it was possible to do that, like in the game I love, a game I played, a game I coached in my hometown, to do something that had never been done before alongside and with players like you and Sue. Just that motivated me every day. I did not want to fail. I did not want us to be the next league that didn't make it, or, and I absolutely loved what I did. Like, as long as the days were and as big as the challenges were, that motivation was always there. And I loved what I did. I had a tremendous amount of joyfulness in my work. And I say that to young people all the time, like really understanding, and even to now my 14-year-old daughter, like really understanding and paying attention to what moves you, what moves your soul. And if you can align that with what you do for work, we spend a lot of time at work, takes a lot out of our lives, a lot out of us as individuals. I mean, you can align that with something that truly brings you joy and purpose. It's the greatest gift you give to yourself. But it was with a lot of help and a lot of people, and I certainly made a lot of mistakes and grew up a lot, but for me, I'm super proud that I held the flag for that franchise for 15 years through 4 ownership groups.
Yep.
And through a lot of change and adversity and challenge that a lot of people don't know about. Some of it, right? But a lot of that we protected and dealt with behind closed doors in the spirit of protecting the brand and the team that our community loved. But it wasn't without a tremendous amount of challenge behind the scenes. And I'm proud of the fact that I think I did that with grace and with effectiveness. And so every time a new group came in, I was able to create continuity and stability. I mean, the Storm is as successful as it is because of committed ownership groups, amazing athletes like you and Sue, and 2 CEOs in 21 years.
Yeah, right.
That's pretty leadership stability. Stability is underrated.
Yeah, stability is so important. I guess, during that time too, obviously you became a mum, which is touched on as well. How did, and it's funny, I've had some conversations in the last week where, particularly with women, and it's like, I want people to know that I come to everything that I have to come to. I'm doing my job, I'm managing my children, I'm doing all of this stuff. And I almost go out of my way to make sure that I'm going above and beyond so that men don't say, oh, she can't do it because she's a mum.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Did you feel that sort of pressure? Because I know I do sometimes, and it's like...
I was definitely the only, all my peers were men. Unfortunately for me, I will say, being in a relationship, Lindsay has 2 moms. And I think in many ways, I assimilated more to my male counterparts and, had another mom at home, kind of the primary caretaker for Lindsay. And there's so much of that I would do differently. And regrettably, as we got divorced when I think Lindsay was 6 or 7. Thankfully still really good friends and great co-parents. But I would do that really differently.
Yeah.
And have a lot of regret around how I didn't balance that as well as I would have wanted to, both for my partner, but also for my child. And I think I learned from that. I think the silver lining of that is it really woke me up, and I have committed to sort of doing that differently this second time around.
Yeah. Wow, thanks for sharing that.
And didn't really have anybody talking to me about that. I didn't know when I was in the moment. I mean, my partner was Marilee was certainly giving me feedback, but I remember her saying to me, like, you're married to your job, you're married to the storm, not to me. And I remember her saying that and me kind of looking at her, and she wasn't wrong.
Yeah.
I think somewhere in that job being all consuming and me then pouring into my child, somewhere our relationship kind of stopped being a priority.
Yeah.
I mean, I can see that now. I didn't see it as it was unfolding. By the time I realized that it was, the damage had been done.
Wow, thank you for being so honest about that. That's because I feel like that's one of the biggest challenges that as women we face, and I'm doing it as a single mom, and the guilt is real. Like
it is real.
I mean, this week I'm leaving my kids on Sunday for a month to go play like with the Opals, and I just don't been away most of this week, and I cry a lot, and I feel like I'm not giving them what they need. I know they've got the love and support from the people around them, obviously, but it's not forever, and they are still really young. So anyway, another story.
Yeah, no, I think the comment you made is very astute. That idea of we want to make sure we measure up, and we already know we don't in the eyes of many.
Yeah.
So we're just constantly chasing that bar.
Yeah.
And making trying to eliminate any excuse that someone else is going to have that we don't measure up. And it's just that paradigm is just wrong.
It is wrong. And it's something that for me personally, like I have to often look at and be like, no, you've got to do what makes you happy in this moment.
Absolutely.
Because I know I'm doing the very best I can do, and all women are, like, in our situations.
And it's almost like giving yourself permission to know that you will be the best mom you can possibly be by putting yourself first and your joy and happiness first. And your boys know that. They're too young to articulate that, but if that continues to be something that you stay committed to through all your decisions and choices, that's a super healthy, enriching thing for your children.
Yeah.
And not enough women allow themselves to make choices that they know are good for them, because we all put everybody else first. And so it's a muscle and a culture that we have to just keep talking about it.
Yeah, I think so too. And it's why we're sort of having these conversations as well, is just being able to talk about it, so so that people don't feel alone in this journey. So I guess, well, I mean, we've sort of touched on it, but looking back on the storm, is there anything that you would have done differently? Like, you don't have to answer this. It's obviously, we just talked a little bit about some stuff then, but with hindsight, is there things that you would have changed, like anything in particular?
I think in terms of my personal life, I definitely would have been more intentional about the balance and the boundaries.
Yeah.
I didn't even know what boundaries meant. Like, so there's no way I could have drawn any because I wasn't intentional enough to know what the downside would be without them. Like, now I do. Just operationally, there's a lot of things I would do differently. I think my biggest sort of maturation and evolution as a leader since leaving the Storm is really understanding the power of letting go. I think, not to get into a longer story, but I try to give myself some grace when I think about the last 8 years when the Storm was an independent franchise and some of the mistakes I made in terms of how I led and managed. And the grace comes in when I remind myself that the first 7 years within an NBA culture and NBA organization, scrapping for this, WNBA property and trying to build the Storm in that environment, I developed certain muscles and habits. And when the Storm became an independent team, those habits no longer really served the organization in the best way. And I see that now, and I try not to beat myself up too much over that, but I think it's just that awareness around like situational leadership. Yeah. And I didn't know what that was. I do now.
Yeah.
And nobody was having that conversation with me. So I didn't, one of the greatest things to come from the current Storm ownership group, Lisa Brummel, who was a longtime HR executive at Microsoft, was the first one that introduced me to the idea of having an executive coach. And my relationship with her is still there today. And she really, really helped me tremendously. And then of course, fast forward 10 years, now I'm an executive coach because I believed so strongly in what that experience meant for me that it's a gift to be able to do that with other people.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, on that note, what are you doing now? Like, what are you up to now? Everything, like, what's life?
After I left the Storm, I just really needed a break. Like I said, it was after the divorce, and the ownership group was stable and doing great, and the organization was in great hands, and it was just like, okay, I really need to take some time for myself. So I took a lot of time off, and then I went and ran a sports technology startup for 3.5 years, and then we sold that to a firm in Chicago right as COVID hit the United States in March of 2020. And Lindsay was in middle school at the time. And I just decided, I'm going to take the rest of the school year off. Well, long enough that my best friend, who was in the WNBA for a long, long time and also worked at Madison Square Garden at the time, Kristen Bernert, came out to Seattle, and we'd always wanted to do something together. And she came out, and we were saying, God, we have an opportunity now. I'm going to leave Madison Square Garden. Let's get back into women's sports. There's some cool stuff going on. Let's figure out how to leverage the fact that we've been there, and let's be a part of this new wave. So we launched an agency 2 years ago, and we're right in the middle of a lot of different projects. It's super, super cool. We're mostly working with investors and owners. So trying to take that experience we have running teams, but helping really onboard owners. There are good owners and there are not so good owners. And I think operating experience is a really important kind of perspective for owners to have as they think about how to deploy capital, how to build their organizations, how to build a culture. So we're having a blast working with owners who want to get involved, who either are in women's sports or they want to get involved in women's sports. And we're working across 6 or 7 different sports all across the country. And it's super, super cool. But yeah, then I got into executive coaching, and I sort of curtailed that a little bit to do this KB2 thing. But I still have a handful of clients that I'll be with for as long as they'll have me. And it's one of my favorite things to do.
Oh, that's brilliant, KB. Well, that's really, we all need to sort of talk on today, but like, I'm just so glad to, hear your story and your perspective and everything. You're just such an incredible human. It's beautiful.
Back at you. I'm so proud of what you're doing and how you're paying it forward. And, you and I had a long conversation about all those lessons and reflections. And I think a gift to both ourselves and to others is how we take that and use that.
Yeah.
And share those stories, and without judgment and without regret. It's life.
Yeah, it is.
And I think it's been super healing for me to be able to just reflect and figure out how to use that to grow and invest in other people. And I think it's really cool what you're doing, Lauren, and to see you back on the court is just, I can't even put words to it. And you're healthy, and I couldn't be more proud. And as you continue to do what you're doing, I'm a phone call away. And as I've said to you many times, there isn't anything I wouldn't do for you.
Oh, that's amazing.
All right. Love you.
All right. I love you too. And we'll come back to you with a month.
Yeah. Sounds good. Yeah. Thank you. Bye.